Hello, you're listening to the Eric McKenna Project. Are you ready?
Are you the founder or the co-founder of the Clarks?
Well, there's four of us that are the original members.
Okay.
And Rob and Dave, the guitar player and the drummer,
Right.
they were the two that really sort of had the idea to start the band.
Okay.
So, I mean, the four of us really are the all co-founders of the band.
Yeah. And what was the administration?
The administration was sort of the band before the Clarks that me and Rob and Dave had with a different bass player. Greg wasn't in the administration.
Okay.
So there was a different bass player, and then we had a saxophone player.
All right.
And we just did cover songs. We would do English Beat and Pretenders and Joe Jackson, very 80s.
Okay.
And because we had the sax player, we would always try to find songs that worked with that. In Excess was good for that stuff.
No
they
question.
always had the sax.
No question.
So so that was the administration. That was 85.
Okay.
And then that school year when that was over, that summer, me and Rob went to Ocean City, Maryland for the summer.
All right.
And actually, first time we ever wrote songs was down there. Wrote a couple songs. Had a friend who was a guitar player, and we would sit around and play at night. And then when we came back to school in September '86, the bass player and the sax player had graduated.
Okay.
So they were done. And then Rob knew Greg.
Right.
From, I guess they were in bands in high school. They both went to North Allegheny. So they knew each other. I don't know that they were ever in bands together, but they knew one another. And so Rob asked Greg if he wanted to play bass in our band. He said yes, and the rest is history.
It's not quite that simple, though. So before we go from the administration to the Clarks,
Right.
talk to me about who was your influences as you were sitting in Ocean City, Maryland in '85 that got you into guitar as a kid, I'm guessing.
Right.
And what did you dig that you were hearing at that time?
Well, when I started, I loved Prince, Tom Petty. All those were the things that really caught my ear as a teenager before college. And then when we got to school and that time frame, that 85 era, I remember that summer there was a band that had just come out called the Bodines. And they had a great record called Love and Hope and Sex and Dreams, and we covered a couple of their songs.
I vaguely remember them.
And and Peter Gabriel's So came out that summer, In Your Eyes and Red Rain, and not that our music was anything like that, but those albums, and there was a band from Minneapolis called The Replacements.
Oh yeah.
Had an album called Tim, which we loved.
That was well before they wrote the Friends song, right? Did they?
That's the Rembrandts.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I remember both. Now I remember both bands. I actually remember the Replacements a little better because the Rembrandts, I think the only song I ever knew was the Friends.
Yeah, the Friends theme. And they had a bunch of great songs. They were a terrific band, too. I love the Rembrandts.
Yeah.
Those kind of bands, Replacements. And at that time, REM was still very much an underground college band. Murmur was popular in their first couple albums by that time, 85. And then even U2 was still relatively less mainstream than they became.
That's when they were edgy and powerful. I think the first couple records.
That War record in '83, I think, was just a huge record for me. I remember listening to that.
Remember the Red Rock show that was kind of iconic?
Yes, that was a live. They turned that into a live EP called Under a Blood Red Sky.
Correct.
Which was amazing. And so that was huge. That was big for us.
That kind of changed music a little bit too.
I think so. Yeah, absolutely. That really changed how I looked at music and the bands that I liked. I grew up sort of listening to arena rock. Type
What's
bands.
wrong with that?
And absolutely nothing wrong with that. And I loved
Look around the room.
I loved, and I was in high school. I loved Journey and Foreigner and all those bands. And I was sort of somewhat aware of Elvis Costello and the Pretenders, and so those started bands, little new wave. I hate to label things, but it wasn't your typical mainstream rock stuff that you heard on the radio. I started catching wind of that.
Right here, you grew up in.
I grew up in Connellsville in Fayette County.
Okay.
So, you know,
within the reach of DVE?
Yeah,
okay.
certainly within the reach of DVE.
Okay.
And within, you know, at that time it was, I remember in the late 70s maybe, there was a station WPEZ.
Oh, yeah.
I seem to recall.
Yeah.
And then WYDD.
Oh, yeah.
Was big.
104.7.
104.7, right. And so, you know, all that stuff. And then I started hearing like Donnie Iris. Had no idea that he was a Western Pennsylvania guy. Just
Right.
loved Ali like everybody else.
Right.
And then I heard Shiver and Shake by the Silencers.
Right.
Vitamin L by B.E. Taylor Group. And I just, you know.
That's a big song.
I was huge.
Mm-hmm.
And that was, you know, mid-'80s, early mid-'80s.
Late, I think, I know if I was in college, fall of 83, I think.
Yeah.
All was on the radio.
So, I mean, all that stuff really impacted me and sort of got me interested in more alternative styles of music. And
so talk to me about that work, because this is really what I really want to talk to you about.
Right.
As a fan appreciator of bands and not a musician, a guy I do around on guitar a little bit, but when the term alternative actually was quote unquote mainstream, and I want to say that was maybe 88 on, would you something like that ballpark?
Yeah.
Even MTV kind of used it to create programs, 120 minutes or something like that.
120 minutes, sure.
Before the word alternative came, everything wasn't so genre centric. It was rock and roll, maybe / heavy metal,
right?
Or there was R&B, maybe, because how could you put a genre on Prince? Even like guys like Rick James on the R&B side.
Right.
But it seemed like when alternative came, this radio stations, the programmers, it seemed to me as a fan of music that the record companies wanted to differentiate between traditional rock and roll or maybe even 80s metal or whatever that was, to something that was new. Right. Did you feel that as well, too?
Yeah, certainly. That was a label that they gave to anything that wasn't sort of guitar-based traditional rock and roll. You know, everything from Psychedelic Furs to, you know, and then there were bands like In Excess, which kind of blurred the line. They're still a rock band, really. I mean, in their essence. And, you know, MTV was what really, I think, exposed a lot of people to that type of music, because, you know, prior to that, you didn't really hear that stuff on the radio. But then it got so popular on MTV that's when stations like WYDD, I seem to recall, was a little more inclined to play newer bands like that.
They were edgy to the fan, a little more edgy in what they would play. Slightly more eclectic, maybe.
Yeah. And people got, I think, annoyed with the term alternative, because alternative became mainstream to some degree. Right. And it was, you know, they still use that term, but now it's...
I'm real confused today.
Yeah, and people say, well, it's alternative to what, you know? But that's really what it started out, I think, in the 80s, was, you know, alternative to sort of straight-ahead guitar-based rock and roll, whether it was more metal or more, you know, like Tom Petty. Right. But even when Tom Petty came out, I mean, he had an edge to him that, you know, they didn't really know his record company in the States.
Too. That was some pretty heavy. Some of those guitar tracks are pretty heavy. Yeah, Running Down a Dream and things like that. That's a rock song.
Well, that's a rock song, yeah. But when he first started, like late 70s, when American Girl
Dragging My Heart Around,
Breakdown, and you know, he got big in England. Right. You know, they kind of threw him in with that new wave, and that was the term that I remember being thrown around a lot in 83, 84, as we used that term new wave to describe Flock of Seagulls and Men at Work. And
Men at Work, The Fix, Flock of
The
Seagulls.
Fix, who I love.
Public Image Limited came out of there.
So, you know, and then it became... You know, alternative sort of early 90s kind of encompassed Pearl Jam and Soundgarden, but at that point, that was all mainstream.
Help me understand
that. It got enormous.
How's that alternative?
And well, they got. I think it just got pigeonholed into a way to categorize certain types of music. It certainly wasn't alternative anymore. It was very mainstream. I mean,
grunge or whatever that.
Grunge, and it's just a way, I think, for people that need to have a label on something. But there and within all that stuff and that sort of blanket umbrella of rock and roll, I mean, you go everywhere. You can go from, you know, really heavy stuff to, you know, the lighter side of rock and roll, and still guitar-based music that was, you could still call it rock, I guess.
Okay, because it's fair for me to tell you, and I've always wanted to, and I never did it in the prior meetings. Your band left a huge impression on my life. It was in the early 90s, and I was in my young 20s.
Yeah.
Single.
Right.
And it was, for a lot of us, it was the Pirates in the playoffs, the Penguins in the hockey, and it was the Clarks on Friday night.
Wow.
Sometimes Saturday night.
That's great.
That basically was our social life. And it was we used to play at Market Square,
right,
I think, on Fridays.
Yeah,
and
right.
we went because that's where the girls were.
Yeah.
That's where the women, where the Clarks would draw.
Good-looking girls.
They always did.
Yeah.
And that was part of our, rituals, a funny word to use, but that's what we did. We were all like young urban professionals to some degree, and that was our thing.
I know.
And you were really a part of that, and that's why I want to tell you, my friend, and I'm sure you've been told this before, but I want to tell you, you are one of the very top, most important bands in Pittsburgh history, without a doubt.
Oh, thanks.
You are absolutely... And I think anyone that's listened to your music knows. I mean, you are an extremely important band to this region.
Oh, I appreciate
that. But your career your tapestry is blended right into Pittsburgh, and that's amazing. That's really amazing to me.
You certainly had a good run.
Yeah. And you're not done yet.
We're not done. No. We've entered a different phase, and we're all grown and families, and it's changed. Life has happened to us, and we don't travel like we used to. But
talk about you go back to the first two records, and we don't have to dive into specific songs, but just you formed this band out of Indiana. Did you all graduate college?
I don't know. Rob didn't graduate.
Good. There had to be at least one.
Yeah.
I
Rob
can relate
dropped
to that.
out. He was a French horn major.
Okay.
He was a music guy. Yeah. He was a drum major at NA and majored in French horn at Indiana, and I think he went there for 2 years.
He was a musician then.
Yeah, he was a real musician and still is.
Right.
So he didn't graduate, but the rest of us did. And interestingly enough, they bestowed upon the band, the four of us, distinguished alumni in 2004, which was really funny for Rob because he never really graduated, but he's distinguished alumni. So we always
you go.
Laugh about that a little bit. But that first record, I mean, we were straight out of Indiana, just starting to write our own music, and there used to be a competition in Pittsburgh called the Graffiti Rock Challenge.
Oh, absolutely.
So I'm sure you're aware.
Yeah.
And
I love that place, by the way.
Yeah, I miss
that
Graffiti.
Place.
That was a great venue.
I do too. For all kinds of music.
Saw some of the best shows I've ever seen. I saw there. And so we were really that was probably late '87, early '88.
Right.
Or probably late '87, and I don't even think we lived in Pittsburgh yet. I'd graduated in '87. Greg had graduated 2 years prior, and Dave, I think, was '88. Mm-hmm. So we were all still sort of scattered around, and entered this competition. Needed a name in a hurry. I remember we didn't even have a name for the band at the time.
Right.
And Greg was working for a printing company, and he had a few clients named Clark. I remember. And this is the actual story. We've told other stories too.
I'm sure,
for brevity's sake. And at the time we were fans of the Smiths, and there was a band from Philly called the Johnsons. Mm-hmm. So there was this thing about surnames that we found appealing. And Greg came into rehearsal, one night, and we needed a name for this competition, and we needed it quickly. And he said, "Well, what about the Clarks?" And we thought, "Well, that's okay. We'll use it for this competition, and then we'll find something cooler afterward." And so we did really well in the competition. We came in second. So then we had name recognition. Mm-hmm. People knew who we were. We had already built up a bit of a fan base as the Clarks. So at that point, we were sort of stuck with it.
And you just continued on.
And we just continued on, and it's been fine because it's not something you have to spell for people or explain.
No.
Or
there's been so many other descriptions of that people have said it was after the Clark Candy Bar.
Sure,
I've heard everything. I've heard everything.
And we've probably encouraged those stories. I'm sure there have been situations where people have asked us, and rather than go into the details, we've said, well, we're just big Clark candy bar company, and that was always a pretty obvious thing. A big Clark sign on the north.
Yeah, but that
on the
story
north
would trickle
side.
back to the masses, and that's probably where I heard it because I was just
that was something. And then I remember for a while there we were saying we were big fans of Lewis and Clark, the Explorers, just as a joke. And
people believe anything.
And we ran with that for a while, but you got the skinny there.
How did you get signed first? Because I know in reading and doing research with it, that's fascinating to me. Just coming from the business, and there was a period with MCA,
right?
But you also had your own label.
Yeah, well, the first 3 albums, I'll Tell You What, Man, and the Clarks, which has Penny on the Floor on it, and then Love Gone Sour, Suspicion and Bad Debt, were all released on our own label, which we called King Mouse Records.
Right.
And
how was that? I mean, you're green, you're coming out of college.
Yeah.
And that's the era where everybody was getting signed. And
well,
there was label money.
Sure, we wanted to be signed. That was certainly a goal. And Rusted Root got signed. They got really big, and then Gathering Field got signed, and then we were just, we'd been busting our tails for 6, 7, 8 years at that point, and thought, well, what do we have to do here? So we made a record called Someday Maybe. It had songs like Caroline on it, and Mercury, and some really popular Clark's classics. And we made that album in Germantown, New York, in upstate New York, in the Hudson Valley. It was the first time we'd ever left Western Pennsylvania to make a record. And
why'd you leave? What, just to record?
Just something different.
Just get away?
Just get away. Just go to I don't want to say a real studio, but go to a studio that had been around a long time and work with other producers and other people, and just to see how it would work. All those other records had sort of been put together piecemeal. We recorded one in the first one was in Aircraft, I think, in Penn Hills.
Wow.
And then
that goes back a way.
And then there was a studio, Alpha Star, in McKeesport.
Yeah, I didn't know where it was. I remember that name, though.
Yes, I was in McKeesport. And then Love Gone Sour we recorded with Barney Lee in Dormont, and I can't recall the name of his studio. And then when we did Someday Maybe in Germantown, it was just nice to go away, and we had, I think it was 10 days. So, prior to that, it took months to sort of do this because we were all working day jobs.
Sure.
And so by this point, we'd all quit our day jobs, and we thought, let's just go away and do this in 10 days. And this is our time frame, and it has to be done. We didn't do the vocals there, but we did, all the drum tracks, bass tracks, guitar, etc. And it was literally right on the river, and there were train tracks, the commuter trains going up and down the Hudson Valley down to New York City.
How'd you fight that ambient noise?
Well, you had to stop. I mean, you had to, there were times when it's like, okay, there's a train going by, and you'd have to just wait a minute or two.
Any chance to leave any of that in?
Well, yeah, we did. We recorded the one song called Last Call, which is sort of an acoustic-y song about being in a bar at 2 a.m. And so we had sort of a bunch of people sing on it, like a gang vocal, and we recorded the train going by. And that's the very last sound on the recording is the train.
That's very cool.
And our road manager at the time, our sound guy, Dana Canoni, who owns Church Recording Studio in Overbrook now.
Right.
We were putting pennies on the track for the trains to smash. Very childhood thing to do.
You guys must have been bored up there.
We were. I mean, there were times when there were times it was very work intensive, and then it's like, okay, now we need to work on this drum track for 4 hours. So it's like, okay, the hotel where we were staying wasn't close by, so we didn't go back and forth. There was really nowhere to go, so we just hung out at the studio. They had a nice little kitchen area, and,
right.
And we would just put pennies on the train tracks. And I remember Dana Canoni put one on, and the train was coming, and we're yelling, Dana! We thought he was going to get hit by the train. And so anyhow, to get back to your original question,
Sure.
we recorded this album, and this was the golden age of CDs, mid-90s, where if you were an independent band, you could make your own album, and you could sell 10, 20, 30,000 CDs.
Right.
fortunately for us, we had DVE support, so we were on the radio in Pittsburgh, we were on the radio in Cleveland, we were on the radio in Erie and Morgantown and Harrisburg and a lot of different places in this region. And once you start selling 20, 30,000 of your own CDs, then records companies start sniffing around.
Take notice.
And management companies. And we had actually, when the Love Gone Sour record was
Were you
Cigarette.
self-managed at that point?
Well, we were at that point, yeah. We had one or two managers who were just local friends.
Sure.
Who, did a nice job for us as far as just booking the band and doing local management, but nobody that was really had ties to the industry.
Yeah.
So the Love Gone Sour record was Cigarette, the record prior. We'd actually had interest from, his name was Doug Thaler. He was Motley Crue's manager.
Okay.
And he loved that record, and he really wanted to manage the band. And in hindsight, I really wish we would maybe worked with Doug, because Doug was connected, and
Sure.
he lived in L.A.
Sure.
and we were, and looking back on it, we were just young and didn't know much. We were just so focused on a record deal.
What year would that have been?
This is 94,
Roughly.
95.
Yeah. Okay. Mid-90s.
Yeah, and we were just like, yeah, maybe. We were sort of just putting him off. Yeah, maybe we'll talk
Was
to
it
you.
the different genre of music part of the reason?
No, it
or?
was just not being interested in having somebody telling us what to do. I think it was
The spirit of rock and roll.
I think it was mostly that, and not understanding the importance of a good manager.
Right.
And really, we were putting the cart before the horse with the record deal. We were more worried about the record deal, but really, in hindsight, we should have been more concerned about finding a good manager who could then navigate getting a record deal and how
Or
to
shop
deal,
you.
shop the band.
Right.
Once you're signed, how to deal with the record company. Because when we signed with MCA, we didn't have a manager at the time.
Wow.
We just signed as the four guys in the band.
So they presented the contract. Did you have a look at them?
Oh, yeah,
Did
we
you-
had a lawyer. We had an entertainment lawyer
Okay.
that
Okay.
we got hooked up with. But,
Okay.
and that's just a little aside with Doug Thaler. But I even flew out to L.A. and met with him. But this was after we were signed.
Got it.
And so we put off Doug. And then when Someday Maybe came out, we were selling a bunch of units in Western Pennsylvania and around this region. And we played a radio show in Detroit. There was a radio station called The Planet, and they were playing some stuff of ours, and we got onto an outdoor event that they were sponsoring, and there was a band there on the bill called the Y Store, and they were from Indiana. And they were on MCA, and there was a subsidiary of MCA called Way Cool Music, and it was this guy who had started. He was in radio promotion, and he helped break. I can't remember the guy's name. That was married to Gwen Stefani. His band.
Oh, Bush?
Bush. He
Yeah.
helped break Bush.
Devin or Devin somebody? I can't remember the name.
So anyhow, he really was successful in radio promotion. So they gave him his own little specialty label, and the Y Store was on, and he had maybe one or two other bands. And so he was at that festival, and he saw the band, and he really liked what we were doing. And he came to us at that festival and he said, I really like your band. I'm interested in maybe signing you guys. And we were over the moon. We thought, well, this is great.
Sure.
So we stayed in contact with him. And a couple weeks later, he flew out to Pittsburgh and saw us play in front of a hometown crowd. And, it was thousands of people. And he was, at that point, he's like, wow, these guys are obviously can put on a show. The people love them here. And said, I want to sign the band. So we found an entertainment lawyer. And within a month or two of that, we were signing on the dotted line to Way Cool Music, which was part of MCA. So we were under the MCA umbrella, and we were getting paid by them. And we flew out to L.A. and we met all the big wigs. And the president at the time of MCA was the guy who started IRS Records, who discovered REM and his name escapes me at the moment, but all very nice people. I don't know that they were particularly enthralled with the Clarks. This guy that had his own label, he was our guy, and he was the one pushing us.
Right.
But and they had a contract with him, so they sort of contractually had to promote us to a certain degree. But that was the era of record companies signing 10 bands, throwing everything up against the wall and see what sticks, and maybe one or two things stick.
Right.
And our record came out the same week as I remember being on a little compilation CD, and there was Sister Hazel, that song, All For You, their big hit song. And that came out at the very same week. And I remember that song, hearing it on the radio and thinking, boy, I wish we could get airplay like those guys are getting. They put out Caroline. Caroline was the first single. And it did okay, but it didn't do what MCA wanted to see happen. And actually, Semisonic, the band that did...
yeah, I remember them as well.
Closing Time.
Yeah.
We did a couple shows with them. And,
I was bartending in evenings, and that song was written. I remember, that's why I remember hearing it.
Right, and they were on MCA at the time. And so that song started to get popular, so all their... attention and energy and finances went toward that, I think.
Got it.
And so, we had signed a 2-record deal, and soon found out that it doesn't matter what it says. If they don't want to put out a second record, they're not going to do it.
Right.
So I think the relationship between the guy from Way Cool and the rest of MCA sort of started to go south, and the MCA dropped us and the Y Store. The Y Store had made another record, though, and in hindsight, we were very lucky, because when they dropped our band, they really just dropped us and said, "You're free and clear. Do what you want to do." A lot of record companies at that time, they would still have you under contract, but then they wouldn't do anything. They wouldn't release your record. They wouldn't. You couldn't record. You couldn't do anything, and so this would go on for a year, 2 years, and you'd have to fight a legal battle to get out of the contract, and that's what the Y Store went through. I think eventually MCA released the record that they had made, but this was 2 or 3 years later. They didn't have anybody at the label supporting them. They basically just put it out to fulfill the contract, and then they were done. But so we were fortunate that they just dropped us. But that was I remember being sort of a low point for me personally. I'm sure the other guys felt.
So we're the late 90s now?
This is probably 98. 98. Okay. I think they had put out Someday maybe in 97, and then by 98 the romance was over, and so there was a lot of soul searching, and what should we do, and should the band continue, or should we just hang it up?
Did you ever feel your sound changed a little bit? Was it with the wave of music at that time?
What happened was, we had met a guy through MCA, a producer in Nashville named Justin Niebank. He lived in Franklin, Tennessee, just south of Nashville. And he had worked with a lot of big country acts, and he had engineered on Eric Clapton records, and worked with Mellencamp, and just had been around, and was very successful, and really had a great ear for stuff, and had been in bands all his life. So we had gotten hooked up with Justin by the people at MCA. They said, well, we think this producer could really make you guys sound great, and they were right about that. But then when they dropped the band, we had already gone in and done 2 songs. We'd recorded Snowman and I'm a Fool for the Let It Go album. Okay. And to demo that stuff, to see if he liked us, if we liked him, if the record company liked the marriage. And the results were fantastic. I mean, we loved what happened. And this is to answer your question. Justin had a real vision sonically about what this band should sound like. He took us for, the Someday Maybe record is okay.
Like
prior to Let It
quality?
Go, prior to Let It Go, I'm not crazy about any of the way any of those records sound. I don't like the way.
Can I ask you a general question?
Yeah.
Why is that? Why do you think that is? Was it limitations in equipment, limitations in producers you worked with, and limitations in yourself?
All those things.
Okay.
I think it was all those things. I think it was the limitations as songwriters, limitations as players, maybe limitations
There's
as
some beautiful songs from that era.
Yeah, there's some decent stuff that came out of that, and some Clark's classics that we still play live. But when I listen to the recordings of maybe Cigarette or Penny on the Floor, it just makes me cringe.
A lot of artists are that way.
Oh yeah,
it's
not
genres.
Uncommon.
It's a common, and especially those who were recording in the '70s, where there was a lot of tape hiss and just they look back now and they cringe at it. Sometimes the '80s is an improvement for them,
right?
But in your career, though, you look back on the late '80s and the '90s, most of the '90s. It's just not.
We just those first 4 records, it just didn't happen sonically for us. Right. Then we met Justin. We did those 2 songs. We loved the song, the way that it sounded. He really liked us. We got along. Our personalities all meshed. So once the MCA dropped the band, we got in touch with Justin and we said, hey man, we really like what you did with the band. We would still love to make a record with you. And he said, let's do it. He didn't have to. He was certainly busy enough that he didn't have to do that with us. I think he liked us. So we made a live record in the interim. Called The Clarks Live, and we recorded it at Nick's Fat City, and that was like 98 into 99. And that record really
was it one night or was it multiple nights?
It was multiple nights.
Yeah,
we recorded multiple nights.
One or two of those because you announced that it was you were recording.
People knew it was for a recording.
Right, I remember.
So that really helped us sort of get out of our funk. Not only that, but it financially, when we got dropped by MCA, they were paying us. It wasn't huge money, but we were making money.
Right.
And when that ended, we did that live record, and suddenly we were selling. I don't even remember. It was just insane.
Yeah.
The band was more popular than ever in this region.
Yeah.
We were starting to tour all over the East Coast. And
talk about that for a second. How was that touring experience?
It was great.
Did you like it? Did you not like it?
Both. There were times when you'd do a show in New York City, and you'd think we suck. I mean, nobody likes us. There's nobody here. I'm nervous. We're in New York. I don't feel comfortable on stage. I just feel like we're just wasting our time. And then there were moments. Exact opposite. Be in Washington, D.C. in front of a crazy crowd down at the Bayou in front of 400 or 500 people, and people are going nuts. And it's like, well, maybe we are okay, and people do like us. And so there was a lot of both.
Roller coaster almost.
It was very much a roller coaster.
How did you folks tour? Was it a bus you gave?
Oh, no. At this point, it was
vans?
still a van and a trailer.
A van and a trailer.
A van and a trailer. And we were road warriors. We were starting to really travel a lot, everywhere on the East Coast, Chicago, Columbus, Cleveland, Boston, Philly, D.C., down into the Carolinas. And then so we recorded Let It Go with Justin in 1999 in Franklin, Tennessee, which was creatively and personally probably one of the high points of my life. I'll never forget being there for that first record and hearing what he was doing with our music.
Got it.
And just feeling like this guy is just magic.
He gets it.
He gets it. And it was the first time in my singing career that I felt like someone actually captured what I really sound like. The live album was like, okay, this is starting to sound like me and less like me trying to sound like other people.
That's interesting.
Yeah, and so when we did the Let It Go album, I was listening to the playbacks of that stuff thinking, he's got it, man. And the band, I think, was peaking too.
Right.
I think we were peaking as songwriters, as players. We'd been together for over 10 years, so we were really a tight 4-piece rock band. And I was singing really well, and we were all writing really good songs. Me and Greg were really, I think, at the top of our game. In part because
it's a great album.
Yes, it is. It's still probably one of the most popular Clarks albums, and we still do. I bet 3 or 4 or 5 songs from that album in our live shows.
I bet.
And there was a time from we did Someday Maybe, recorded that in '96 or even late '95, to when we started recording for Let It Go, which was late '98, '99. So there was that was 3 or 4 years of building up this log of songs. Prior to that, it was every 2 years we were making an album. So maybe the material was not the best that it could have been. But by this time, having 3 or 4 years to write songs, Greg had written Snowman and Butterflies and Airplanes and really, really good stuff. I had written Born Too Late and I'm a Fool, and Rob had come up with the idea for Better Off Without You, which I sort of helped finish.
Born Too Late. Just speak for a second about that, because the first time I heard that on the radio, I remember where I was driving. It's an emotional song for me.
Yeah.
Probably because of just happened to be where I was born, and the lyrics of that song. Right. I always kind of felt that way. And when I talked to friends of mine, they always would take it real personal. Like, that could be me saying that.
Yeah.
I feel just like those lyrics. Where'd that come from?
It came from my feeling that I was born in 1964, which is, generationally what they consider the last year of the baby boomer generation.
Right.
But I never felt like a baby boomer.
Right.
I'm sure all of us born in the early 60s never really felt that connection to the baby boomers, who were really the post-World War II generation, born mostly late 40s and into the 50s. So I never really felt like a baby boomer. I never really felt like I was part of what they came next with Generation X.
I think.
Gen X.
Yeah. Then why?
And that was, those kids were all younger. That was the generation that really latched onto Pearl Jam and that.
A lot of the
Nirvana.
Generation X's were your fans too, though.
Yes. So I was sort of stuck in that little middle group. And I remember watching the Woodstock movie a couple of times in the early 90s and just feeling like I should have been born a little sooner, and that the style of music that the band was playing was more suited to the 70s
I thought.
than it was to the 80s or even the 90s, and that I was just born too late. I was 10 years too late.
It's great lyrical content, though, and I can tell you, I can't tell you how many people that have told me they can really reflect and resonate. It resonates with them.
Yeah, it's far and away one of the most popular Clark songs. I mean, and you know how if you go on iTunes and they list songs by popularity, and that's always number one. So it's been a huge song. Teachers use it in classes to teach history, and
That's very cool.
it is very cool. It's been used in classrooms, which is really a neat thing.
Were you talking about Hendrix, or you're talking about Jimmy Page in there?
Oh, it's Jimi Hendrix.
Okay, I always wondered that. Now I have the answer.
Yeah, and the reason, and really, he was the first character that inspired the song, because I remember we had a house in Highland Park that was the Clark House, and we rehearsed there, and we'd all lived there at one point. And I think I was the last man standing by the late 90s. Everybody else had gotten married and moved away. So I was sitting in my living room one night watching a documentary on Jimi Hendrix, and I was just, I was a casual fan. I wasn't a huge Hendrix fan by any stretch, but I remember sitting there watching that documentary, just thinking what an incredible musician he was, and just a musical genius, and just being blown away by the Star Spangled Banner that he plays at Woodstock on really what is Monday morning. It's supposed to be Sunday night, but everything ran long, and there's only, maybe a couple thousand people left.
Right.
It's just amazing footage of that in that movie.
Yeah. It's amazing they still have it. It was preserved, right?
And most people had left by then, and just watching that documentary and thinking he was just incredible. And when it was over, I was just inspired. I just immediately reached for my guitar.
Wow.
Put a capo on the second fret and just do-no-no-no-no. And immediately I thought, the chorus is, I've had a hard time leaving this town, losing everything that I've found.
Right.
It was very, sort of like I'm lost here. And
was it personal for you?
Yeah, it was very personal, because I had lost my girlfriend, who eventually became my wife.
Right.
The record company had dropped us, so there was a lot of loss, and I felt like the band just wasn't getting out.
They're just due to some degree.
Yeah, to some degree, but I just felt like we weren't getting out into the country the way we needed to. It just felt like we were just stuck, and we were popular in this region, but we're having a hard time just finding our audience in other parts of the country.
Right.
So that's where the chorus came from, and then I had this idea of, wouldn't it be cool if you could allude to famous people, maybe use one name, and maybe allude to what they did or what they were famous for, and it became sort of a puzzle.
I'm still trying to figure some of it out.
Yeah, a little mind game. Okay, some of them are obvious,
Maybe.
Vincent, will you teach me how to paint? I mean, that's pretty
I got that
obvious.
one, right.
And I think
is Jerry?
Jerry is Jerry Garcia.
That's what I thought.
And there was a little group there. It really is Elvis, Will I Ever Be a King? Jimmy, show me how you play that thing. That was Jimi Hendrix.
Right.
Elvis, Will I Ever Be a King? Obvious. And then Jerry, All the Joy and Love You Bring.
I thought it was him. I was never really sure.
And that's probably the one I've had the most questions about. Like, who's Jerry?
What other names were thrown at you?
Jerry Seinfeld. It was the era of that show was number one, and he was everywhere. And
you're gonna laugh at mine. I thought it was Jerry Lee Lewis, because he was a comedian, and it was
Jerry Lewis,
or Jerry Lewis. I'm sorry,
yeah,
Jerry Lee Lewis. Jerry Lewis, excuse me.
Right,
yes.
and then that was the other
comedian.
person that some people thought it was. And I wasn't a huge Jerry Garcia fan or a Grateful Dead fan, but it was late 90s. Touch of Grey was popular. They were selling out. They were doing multiple shows at the Civic Arena, and I was just I was sort of fascinated by the culture more than the music. So, and that little grouping of just musicians. So it was just a natural fit to throw Jerry. I really liked Jerry Garcia. I'd seen interviews with him, and his personality as a human, he just made me laugh and made me smile. And I thought he brings a lot of joy, a lot of love to a lot of people. Yeah. So he was obvious. So, that's where that came out. And that song really sort of wrote itself in about 30 minutes. Once I had the basic idea, it wasn't hard to finish. It was a puzzle, and I was just putting in names and then there was stuff like Cassius, Will You Teach Me How to Fight? I thought, well, older people will know Cassius Clay is Muhammad Ali, but younger people might not know who that was. And then somebody pointed out something which I found very interesting. Thomas A., I think I See the Light. For me, it was Thomas Edison. But then somebody said, well, how about Thomas Aquinas, who became a saint, I believe, and had some connection with light. There's some connection there, and I can't remember what exactly it was, but there was a very specific connection with light, and they pointed that out to me, so I did a little research. I was like, oh, that could totally be him. So I learned something in the process.
Here's the truth today.
So that's where Born Too Late came out of. So there was a lot of time before we recorded that to write good material. We had a bunch of songs, and we really picked the best stuff. And there was a song that I had recorded for a solo album that I did called Flame, and our producer Justin had heard that song because we had given him a bunch of stuff, older stuff.
Right.
That maybe hadn't been recorded and released, and said, well, is there anything here that you think is really good? And he pulled that song out and really sort of remade it, and it was one of my favorite recordings on that album. And then there was another one which is called Chasing Girls, which really was a joke song that I had. I was at that time I had a little cassette player, and I would just anytime I'd have any idea at all, I'd just hit record.
Right.
And have 30 seconds of an idea, and maybe 2 out of 10 end up songs. And so I'd given him 3 or 4 cassettes. I said, well, just listen through all this stuff, and I had recorded that as a joke.
Okay.
And he heard it, and he's he's like, oh, that's so cool. And I was like, really? Do you want to do? And so we recorded that, and in hindsight, I wish we wouldn't have.
But that's the start of the new century was busy for you then.
Yeah, that was that. And as soon as we recorded that album, we immediately had interest from other record companies, and we decided to record to go with a company called Razor and Tie, which was what they call a major independent, an independent label in that they weren't one of the big, labels like Atlantic or CBS or Sony or anything like that, but they had major label distribution through Universal. Yeah. So they could get our record in stores all over the country. Right. Which was great, but they were still an independent record company and didn't quite have the deep pockets that was necessary
for distribution.
Well, no, for promotion, to get your songs on the radio and to make videos and to get them on MTV, which was really still at that time, 99, 2000, 2001, was still the main way. It's
kind of the dirty part of music, though.
It is.
I mean, I hate to use that word payola, but I'm not saying that money goes across the table, but as well as I do, promotion is everything.
Yeah. And there were independent radio promoters, and you paid them to get your song, and however they did it, nobody really
no one knows.
No one cared, and just get my song on the radio. If it costs X amount of dollars, then we'll pay X amount of dollars, and I don't think Razor and Tie had that kind of resources, those kind of resources. So that being said, they still did get Better Off Without You was played all over the country. I mean, it got a lot of airplay and really helped to break the band in other places. And at that point, then it was like, okay, let's get on the bus, and we're playing in L.A. and we're playing in Seattle and we're playing in Minneapolis,
so now
and Orlando,
you're touring on a bus, a little different than the van.
And then and then we're in the bus, and then it was real. Then it was the real deal. And we did a tour with Steely Dan. I mean, we played with John Mayer, and we were going out with heavy hitters.
Right.
And and had a lot of fun and made a great record and that was the point in this area, in this region, where we had been together for about 10 or 12 years, and our audience was growing older with us. They were those people were maybe getting married and moving on to another part of their lives, and we really needed an influx of youthful fans. And at the same time was 105.9 The X became a station here in town. And they started playing Better Off Without You, and suddenly we were seeing 18-year-old kids at our shows and 20-year-old kids.
Awesome.
And then it was like huge.
Right.
And that early 2000 period, 2001, 2002, 2003, we were doing summer shows at IC Light Amphitheater. We were selling out multiple nights at 6,000-7,000 people.
I remember.
a night. I mean, it was
I remember.
big.
And
fun, and we just were having a good time. But I remember still thinking we're climbing the mountain, we're getting higher up the mountain, but we're not close to the peak yet, and still wondering if we will ever really get to that peak. And we really didn't. We didn't get as far up the mountain as we had hoped. And then we made the Another Happy Ending record in 2002. We recorded it in 2001.
Right. But it was released in 2002.
And it came out in 2002.
Okay.
And this was the follow-up. And this was the one where everybody was like, okay, we've cracked open the door. Let's blow the door all the way off.
Right.
And for whatever reason, it was a really... I think there were a couple factors. First of all, that was the beginning of Napster.
Yes.
CD sales
right where I was going.
CD sales really peaked
Yeah.
in 99, 2000, maybe 2001. And at that point, it was a slow, steady decline of CD sales. And suddenly, by 2001, 2002 in particular, you didn't need to buy a CD to hear the latest Clark song. All you had to do was go on the internet, and you had it for free.
Yep.
And that sucked.
Changed everything.
It changed everything for
wrong.
everybody.
It still was wrong.
Yeah. And so the cards were already stacked against artists even before that. I mean, a typical record deal was 13%.
Right.
And that's before you're giving away points to your producer and your manager. And
Well, years before, people forget, like by 96, 97, CD duplication was a thing.
Yeah, right.
The consumer could get a CD and make 100 perfect copies and hand those out.
Right.
And then, of course, with the digital downloading, it just went crazy.
Yeah. And the other thing that happened too was the follow-up record, which I like, and there's some really good songs on there. There was nothing that we had. We really didn't record anything like Better Off Without You that was this really good rock song that sounded great on rock radio. We had a song called On Saturday, which is a huge Clark song. It's super popular, but it's a pop song.
It is pop song.
It belonged on B94.
B94. I get it.
And we just didn't have that connection.
Play it live though, I'm sure it was edgy.
It was huge. It's a bouncy sort of fun breakup song. But it just didn't fit on rock radio. And then we had, and it's a fun song. And then we were recording this album in the summer of 2001, and we were still writing songs into the fall. And then 9/11 happened.
I know.
And then I wrote like "Hey You," which is really this sort of slower, more anthemic. I don't want to say downer of a song, but it's just not rock radio material.
No, I get it.
It's a great song, and I love playing it.
It's a great song.
And there are people who just love the song, but it just doesn't.
You were writing what you were feeling at the time, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
but it just didn't fit on DVE or any of the DVE type stations all over the country. So we found ourselves really, there's just nobody to play us. There was nowhere to fit the band, and we didn't have that big rock song that fit on rock radio. And I remember they released "Hey You" as the single, and it just didn't really go anywhere. I mean, it was okay, and did okay around here.
Would it have done different in a different era, maybe?
I don't know, maybe in a different era, but it's just not...
Like today?
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. In any case, it just didn't... The album didn't do it. When "Hey You" didn't really achieve the success we'd hoped, I knew at that very point, I was like, we're not going to get any higher up the mountain. This is this is it.
That
Now,
was the
what
moment.
doesn't mean the band's going to stop, or doesn't mean we're not going to continue to write songs and make records and play for a lot of people.
Right.
But I knew at that point in my heart, and we were still releasing singles, and I was like, it's done. We're done. And I could tell from the radio, from the record company, that their interest was maybe not as passionate for the band as it had been for Let It Go. They were going through some personnel changes. The radio promo people were coming and going.
Well, the industry was in total flux.
And the industry was in complete
Absolutely,
flux.
yeah.
And it was really just being blown up.
No question.
And then we made another record after that 2 years later in 2004 called Fast Moving Cars, and there's some great songs on that.
Yeah.
Shimmy Low, and the title track, and Gypsy Lounge, and and really more rock radio friendly.
Yeah.
But at that point, the record company was not particularly interested in promoting the band, and I knew it wasn't going to go anywhere. And
I think the corporate culture of terrestrial radio started happening too. iHeart and all these companies started. These corporate. DV was owned. Was it Westinghouse? And I don't remember. But it was. There still was that complete, somewhat organic flavor that the station had. It was Pittsburgh station. And to many it still is, but there seems to be these big corporations behind terrestrial radio now.
Yeah,
and a lot of heavy hands go into the playlists.
And that was exactly, you nailed it right, nailed it on the head. That was exactly what happened. Instead of going from station to station and talking to the programmer at that station, suddenly you're talking to a programmer who programs 15 stations. So if you can't get him or her on board, then you don't have a chance.
Right.
And again, to go back to the internet, then suddenly, nobody's buying CDs anymore. I mean, there was, still could sell a few, but you just weren't bringing in the revenue that you were 5 or 10 years prior, because everybody was downloading songs, and even I was. I mean, I remember in 2002, 2003, going on the computer and thinking, wow, I can just have this song for free. And I felt bad about it, but, I understood why people were doing it. And it changed.
Did you?
Yeah. It's free. It's just human nature. Why should I pay for something?
Curiosity of something.
Why should I pay for something I can get for free?
I get it.
And the other thing too was that I can't remember I wasn't using Napster, but I remember whatever website I was using, you could find really cool live versions.
Oh yeah.
Or acoustic versions.
All the bootlegs were starting.
It was tons of.
And technology was getting better, so the people that were doing the bootlegs had higher quality cassette recorders, and all that stuff was happening.
You could find some really interesting stuff on there that you couldn't just go to a record store and find on a CD.
I don't think that really pisses off most of the artists, that kind of stuff, but I think it's that one-to-one. Taking an entire album and just duplicating it, and there it is to have it.
And that's when Metallica was fighting their battles, and
he was
Pearl
right.
Pearl Jam, they were fighting that battle.
They lost in court of public opinion. They took their lumps, but in the essence
they
of it, they were right.
They were right.
And now look what we have. I mean, for a young, could you do this all again if you were 18 years old again? Could you do it today in this environment? You probably could, because you guys were like organic to begin with.
I think you have to. You have to have a really good live show now. I think that's the key. Because if you've got a great live show,
I agree.
And you can take that, it's like church to some people. It's a religious experience. If you have that dynamic singer and great guitar player, even if you're not selling a ton of records, you can sell some tickets to your shows, then you can survive.
Right.
And then maybe you get lucky and a song gets on I don't know, radio or Sirius XM or wherever. No, well, now it's playlists.
Streaming,
you want playlists on Spotify. That's where you want to be. But
paying you guys, like 1/100th of 1 penny for one play,
and that's not enough for any artist to live on. I mean, you can have millions of plays and maybe get a check for $1,000, and that's just it doesn't pay the bills. So you have to be able to have a live show. You have to be able to sell tickets, and recording an album now is basically just a promotional tool to get people to buy a ticket to your show and maybe buy a T-shirt.
Okay, so we're in agreement.
That's where it went.
We're in agreement because I think it's completely flipped. I think bands toured in the 70s, 80s, and most of the 90s to support the album or CD sales. and now the music is, and I use this word with multiple guests on this show, Tony McAlpine, Abby Albandanza, and they don't like it, but when they sit and think about it, it's kind of true. The music has become disposable to a degree. Right. It doesn't devalue what it's worth to society, but people want to use it, they like it, they want to enjoy it, but they're not paying the artist for it. It's almost like a pure commodity that's now you folks put the music out to create the energy to have them come see you live, and that's where your area of make money. Yeah. That's your area to get that done, right?
Yeah. So
monetize. There you go. Doing. Tough word.
Yeah.
But it's kind of flipped around.
Yeah.
The tour was always to support the album sales.
To get people to buy your album. Now it's you make an album to get people to come to your shows.
Yeah. And Abby sat here and said the same thing. He said it's just people want to be absolutely entertained now. Yeah. You think that's anything to do with even like the social media culture? You know, the quick nature of the human attention span, maybe?
Yeah, well, the attention span's gotten shorter. And you know, I have daughters who are 14, 12, and 9, and I hear the music that they listen to. And most of it I don't care for. Every once in a while, 1 out of 10 songs will pop its head through, and I'll be like, wow, that's actually a really good song. You know, for example, "Broken" by Lovely the Band, I thought was a really cool song that my kids were listening to, and I thought, oh, that's kind of a neat song. And then so every once in a while there's something that catches my ear, but I hate to be that old guy that you know says music these days is terrible, but most of it I really have a hard time with it, and I have a hard time with all the singing shows on television. It's just you know, and these kids and I say kids, young people on these shows, they all have nice voices. But they're all doing the same thing, and they're all singing the same old songs that I heard sung better by the original artist 30 years ago. So I don't need to hear a 21-year-old kid singing, you know, an Aretha Franklin song, or because it's like, look, you can't do it better than her. You're not gonna. And if it were my daughter and I was watching, I'd be like, well, she's amazing. Oh, yeah. And she's got a great voice, and that's part of the territory. But every once in a while. And my wife watches those shows, and occasionally she'll say, "Oh, listen to this kid. He or she's really good." And I'll listen to them, and I'll be like, "Yeah, they're good. They're fine." But it doesn't move me.
Well, no.
And again, they're not playing original music. They're singing old songs that I liked better by the original artist. Yeah. So that's tough. But there was a kid, Alejandro. And I can't remember his last name offhand. He was on American Idol this year. Okay. And he plays guitar, and he writes his own songs.
Long hair?
Yeah. He's exceptional.
Yeah. Oh, you'll find once in a while.
He blew me away. Right. And it was the first time I actually, you know, I'd be doing something around the kitchen. My wife would call me over, and I'd stand there and watch whatever performer was that she had to have me watch. And he was the first time I was like, I sat down.
Wow.
And I was like,
this
something. Kid is just amazing. His songs were incredible. His voice was amazing. His guitar playing was, he was just,
the whole package.
He was on another level, 10 stories above all these other singers.
But he won't win.
He came in second. He came in second. What I mean. But I guarantee you, 10 years from now, people will know who he is. Right. And they won't remember who the winner was. Because he's incredible. And I can't remember his last name. His first name's Alejandro. But so in any event, that's where music seems to have gone, and it's a shame. You know, I wish it was more about an album where, you know, and I grew up in the era of LPs. I liked listening to 4 or 5 songs and flipping the album over, because there was a flow, there was an arc, there was a story, and there was artwork, and there was just this tangible thing you could hold in your hands, and there were liner notes to read, and I miss that. I still buy albums. I still have my stereo and my turntable in the garage. So when I find an album that I really love, I'll buy or find a recording that I really love. I'll buy the album. I'll buy the LP.
Right.
Belinda Carlisle, or not Belinda, I'm sorry, Brandy Carlisle's last album, and that Casey Musgraves album is fantastic. So I buy that stuff. But
did you you grew up in the analog era?
Yeah.
You listened to music in analog. Were you an analog versus digital kind of guy? Did you go with the flow? What was
I kind of went with the flow. I was never I never had producer's ears.
Okay.
You know, I was always a very much of a big picture guy. I was always just like, well, what's the song feel like?
Okay.
I mean, what's the big picture here? What's the song? What's the hook? What's it saying to me? You know, I was never the guy that was like, oh, this sound of this guitar doesn't really work with the sound of the rhythm guitar. You know, that wasn't
the
me.
nuances.
Yeah.
You just plug in and go for the most part.
You know, and now that's changed as I've gotten older, having been in the industry now for 30 years. Now I hear things, and I play solo shows, and I know, like, I have a really nice PA of my own, and I know what sounds good now. So that's changed a little. I do have more of an ear for stuff, but I never was one to be able to pick out the subtleties between analog and digital. I loved digital when it came about because I loved having a whole bunch of songs on a little tiny device as big as a Tic Tac box, you know, and then earplugs, because I grew up with Walkmans, and then a Discman, which was like a disc, you know, like an Olympic discus, you know, those things were huge.
Yeah, they were.
So you know that wasn't really practical to carry around. And
but you're saying as an appreciator of music, you embrace digital, but as a musician, you still didn't really have any trouble with it, because a lot of musicians do. A lot of guitarists seem to. I remember when the first digital fuzz effects came in, a little distortion. It was so harsh. It was so, I could definitely tell the difference between an analog or a digital modeling amplifier.
Right.
Does that make any sense?
Sure.
But I think technology's gotten so good now
that
you can't really tell.
98% of the people out there don't know the difference.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's producers, really good producers, who can tell you, but yeah, just the sampling now that you can do with guitars and amp sounds.
Right.
It's pretty amazing.
Right. The songwriting process for you talked quite a bit about it on some specific. Inspiration come from anywhere? Do you find?
Oh, yeah. Particularly relationships. You know, when you're in your 20s, I think you draw a lot of inspiration from being in love and falling out of love, particularly falling out of love.
Right. Yeah.
Breakups were always really good.
You guys had a knack for that, yeah.
Oh, we were the kings of the breakup song for a decade.
Yeah.
Penny on the Floor, Better Off Without You. Those are some of our biggest songs. Right. And then you know, I got married and started a family in 2004, so I had to figure out you know, geez, what are you going to write about? So the first batch of songs, well, first I wrote, I moved to Texas. I lived in Dallas for 4 years.
Oh,
I moved there in 2004. My wife's originally from Washington, PA.
Okay.
But she had gone to Dallas in '98, and she was the breakup in the late '90s when the band was dumped by the record label. That was all, you know, kind of came together for good material at that point. But then we got together in late '03 and found myself in '04. We were having a baby together. We got married in '05.
Okay.
We were starting a family. So I moved to Texas because she was there for her job.
You had 4 years.
I was there for almost 4 years, yeah. 04 to, I think we moved back here in 2007.
Wow. See, I did not know you left. Did not know you left.
Yeah, I was quite a...
Did you keep writing while you were down there?
Oh, yeah, and that's the first batch of songs that I wrote after the Fast Moving Cars record, Razor and Tide, we went our separate ways. I don't want to say they dropped the band. We all, I think we all saw the writing on the wall. We weren't satisfied. They weren't really satisfied. So we were like, well, let's just dissolve the partnership here. And so, you know, that was another period of time with the band where it was like, well, where's this going? You know, and I was moving, so it was making it a little more difficult for me.
How was that received by the rest of the band?
Not great.
Yeah, I wouldn't think.
Yeah, it was tough. But the first batch of songs I wrote was all about leaving home, all about moving, transition, And I wrote a song called San Antonio about a guy who gets divorced and he moves from the north to the south. He hates the rain, he hates the snow, and he just wants to be somewhere where it's sunny. And
Right.
so it was easy. It was a really big experience for me to move away from Western Pennsylvania.
I bet.
I lived here my whole life,
bet.
you know. And so to move to North Texas was amazing and wonderful in so many ways.
Sure.
But also difficult because I was we were still doing shows. I mean, we were still playing a lot. We were still touring. So
Right,
I had to balance all that stuff. I had to fly back to
Logistics.
Pittsburgh. Logistically, it was a nightmare.
Yeah,
I
I
had to
bet.
fly back to Pennsylvania or fly to St. Louis to meet the band and then go out for a week or two and then fly back to wherever I needed to be the next period of time. So I wrote a whole bunch of songs about traveling on, which was the title of the record.
Yeah.
And then the uncertainty hit. Like, well, what's happening with the band here? And then it wasn't until 2009 that we actually made another record. It was a good 5 years.
Yeah, that's what I remember.
It was a long time.
That's what I remember.
We'd put out a compilation disc called Between Now and Then, which had like a best of. And so we were biding our time with that.
Did that do okay for you?
Yeah, it did great.
Good for you.
Yeah, it did
I always
great.
wondered about that.
It did great. Again, it wasn't, CD sales weren't big like they had been, but it really, it became our best-selling album. Well, it was a best of. There were a lot of people who, maybe found the band at Let It Go.
They can
and
catch up in one recording.
Yeah, there was 16 or 17 songs, and it really was a career-spanning retrospective.
You were due for one.
And we were due for one, and it was a perfect time to put it out. We recorded a couple. I think we recorded No Matter What by Badfinger. We recorded the cover of that. It was a great song. And then I think we had two other songs that two new originals to put on it. So it was a nice little project to put out in 2006. But then a lot of time to sort of decide where the band was going and what we were going to do and whether we were going to make another record. And finally we decided to make another record, and it was the first record we'd made with Sean McDonald here in Pittsburgh. All those three Razor and Tie records were all Justin Niebank. We call it the Justin Trilogy. And so this was the first one. We'd recorded The River, the Springsteen song with The River with Sean, and it sounded great, and it was on DVE. And
I remember it well.
We thought, well, let's.
I actually liked your version better than Bruce's.
A lot of people like it. Well, Bruce is very slow and
it's just different.
It's very different. So we loved Sean, and we'd known Sean for many, many years. He had been in bands when we were first starting out. We knew each other for a long time, and he did a great job on The River, so we thought, well, let's make a record with Sean and see where this goes. So I remember writing songs, and all the songs that I wrote on that record were very much third-person stories. It was the first time I was like, well, I'm really not going to write in the first person. There's really no breakup songs here. This is all songs about down-and-out characters. There's murder and there's death and.
Sounds like a country record to me.
It was just not being sure what to write about.
Sure.
Finding inspiration from a variety of sources.
Yeah.
And a song called Inside about a woman who kills her lover because he's abusive.
Wow. It's pretty heavy.
Yeah.
For you, it's pretty heavy content.
Yeah, there was definitely some heavy content on that record. And then really at that point, it was Greg, our bass player. It was really a songwriting split between the two of us. He was writing his stuff, and I was writing my stuff. And then we would get together with the band, and everybody would contribute their own ideas from that point. But there was certainly Greg was starting to write really great songs, had been, and that's where the songwriting went. And then we made a record called Feathers and Bones. And that was a very, very personal record because we all had family members and people very close to us die during the making of the record. And it took and we worked with Sean again, and it took a year and a half to make the record. We were hoping to take maybe 6 months and have something out. And I forget what year it was. It was 2014. I think that came out. We'd hoped to have it out in the summer of 2013. It came out in the summer of 2014. Okay. My dad died at the end of 2013. And each one of us had either a parent
Yeah.
or a grandparent or
So
somebody.
you're all dealing with grief.
We were all dealing with grief, and we had a couple really close friends too that were our age
Okay.
die,
Mm-hmm.
and so there was just death is sort of all over that record.
Mm-hmm.
But it's some of the best songs that I'd ever written. I wrote a song called Irene, which was it had started out about Mindy McCready, the country singer.
Mhm.
I was fascinated by her story
Mhm.
of she's
Mhm.
beautiful and
Oh, yeah.
talented, but she was
Yep.
very troubled,
Yep.
and she died young.
Yep.
And I thought, that's a song.
Yeah.
Beautiful, talented, troubled, died young.
It's a repetitive rock and roll theme too.
And it is. It's a very common theme. So that's where Irene came from. And at the time I was writing, my dad was dying,
Mm-hmm.
and so even though she sort of inspired it, there's a whole lot of my dad
Mm-hmm. I bet.
in that song.
Mm-hmm.
And so and then I wrote a song called Take Care of You, which was more about my children, but it was also about my parents, and they took care of me. Now I'm taking care of my
Right.
kids, and someday
Right.
I'll be my parents' age, and hopefully if I do this right, my kids will my kids will help take care of me. So there's a
Absolutely.
lot of good
Absolutely.
personal material on that.
It's almost
record.
like a diary for you. I
Oh,
always
it's
wondered
totally.
about with someone who's had the career that you've had, and that much songwriting and that much output. It really,
Yeah.
I mean, because the interpretation that we hear as an appreciator of your music, we take the song one direction, but you know the actual
Right.
meaning of the song.
Sure.
So
Sure.
it is a personal diary.
Yeah. So that was Feathers and Bones, and then most recently last year, Madly in Love at the End of the World, which was,
Mhm.
Again, a lot of personal songs about my family and
Mhm.
my life, and
Mhm.
you just have to figure out. There's that old saying: "Is you write about what you know about," and
Right.
that's all I ever tried to do when I was
Right.
young was breakups, and now that I'm older and in a marriage with
Yeah.
children,
Yeah.
I write a little bit about that, but I allude to other things, but it's all from that perspective of a 50-something guy. And
We were
with a
introspective
family.
too, probably. No,
Oh, for
right?
sure.
Yeah.
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 And you just feel more comfortable with your opinions.
Yeah.
You've seen enough and heard
Sure.
enough and
Sure.
been around enough to say, well, I think this is a really crappy situation, and I feel comfortable enough commenting on it now, or I probably wouldn't have 20 or 30
Got
years
it.
ago.
Got it. Talk a little bit about how the country music changed. I mean, actually, Garth Brooks kind of set everything on its rear end in the early 90s, but country and rock and everything seemed to kind of, in the 2000s, country kind of got its legs, I
Right.
think. And I met you at Froggy Radio.
Right.
I think you were doing some acoustic shows with Abby, I think, at the time.
I was
and
doing a bunch of shows with Abby, and we had the Restless Days record, which is
Right.
the first what I talked about with the first Sean McDonald record.
Right.
There was a song on there called Sunshine, which is
Yeah.
very country-ish.
Yeah.
And we had hired a guy.
Did you write on purpose? Were you
No,
really
it was just the
way it came out?
Just the way it came out.
Okay, I always wondered
And
about
there was
that.
a guy named Gary Jacob who played pedal steel, who was playing with Abby at the time.
Yeah.
And we met
Yeah.
Gary, and
I
we
know
asked
Gary.
Gary to play on a couple of
Okay.
the songs on that record, and the stuff that he did on Sunshine it just blew me away. I always loved the sound of the pedal steel. It's just an amazing instrument, and people that know how to play it, I'm blown away by it. And it's traditionally a country instrument.
Right.
But we're a rock band and when we hired Gary, I mean, after the recording, we said, well, you need to play with the band now live, because he's so talented.
Right.
He can
very
play
cool.
pedal steel on a variety of songs, and it
Yeah.
doesn't have to be country, and he can make it sound good.
Got it.
And he's also a really good guitar player, so he doesn't play pedal steel on everything, and we use him to play 12-string guitar
Sure.
or acoustic
That
guitar, whatever.
fills up the sound
whatever we
live.
do. And at the same time, we hired Skip Sanders, a really
Saw that.
amazing keyboard player, at the same time. So the band has grown, and then our drummer's son Noah, who's a terrific guitar player, he's 21. We
Wow.
hired him.
Okay.
So we've got 7 people on stage now. So it's really filled out the sound of the band. The band has really evolved
Right.
in its sound. But to your question about the country thing, I think the Clarks have always had a little bit of country roots. And I wouldn't say country as far as like Willie or Waylon, that kind of country. But, we grew up, I grew up in the 70s where the Eagles were really popular. And really, and going back even to the Byrds and Flying Burrito Brothers. And, that's all country rock.
Good question. Another question.
And I loved that style of music. So I always loved
Allman Brothers are in there too. Yeah.
Yeah, I always loved the melding of those two genres. And even into the 80s, when I referred earlier to the Bodines, they're from Wisconsin.
Right.
Very much the same thing. They were a rock band, but they definitely had the sound of organic, country-ish overtones. And there was a band from LA called the Long Riders, which were very much a country rock act.
Long Riders.
And there was a band, originally the guy was from Natrona Heights. Jimmer Podrasky started a band called the Rave Ups.
Okay.
And they were country rock for lack of a better term.
Right.
It started out as country rock. It turned into what was the term they used in the late 80s, early 90s? It was roots rock.
I remember that.
And now it's become Americana.
Oh,
that's
really?
what it's morphed into.
I have not heard that.
And Americana is just country rock. I mean, it's the same stuff the Eagles were playing in the 70s. It's just rock and roll with country overtones is all it is. And the reason they had to create this genre is because rock took that, grungy turn in the early 90s.
Yeah.
And so it kind of eliminated. I liked some of it. It kind of segregated anybody, including us, that had any sort of country leanings. If you had any of that, then that's not rock and roll anymore. But Tom Petty had that. The Heartbreakers, they can pull off a country song. There's amazing Tom Petty songs like "It'll All Work Out" and just great stuff that is almost country music. And I'm sure Tom was a fan of a lot of older style country. So, but again, I think that grunge thing sort of pushed the rock toward the heavier side. No, it didn't last long. But then it morphed into everything you would hear on the X. On 105.9 The X.
There was Screamo and with all these crazy labels. And I was starting to do guitars, and I was so confused because
and again, it's just putting labels on stuff that really doesn't need or deserve a label. But that's what happened, and that's and that's what happened. I think with the Clarks too. We sort of got we got left behind because we weren't rock enough. Rock and roll, which was what I loved growing up in the 70s, it was rock and roll. It wasn't rock.
Rock and roll.
It was rock and roll.
Stones.
And the Stones. And again, I hate to keep referencing Tom Petty, but Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers are a rock and roll band. They're not a rock band. They're a rock and roll band.
Yep.
But then you had to become a rock band. In the 90s, it was rock. It was rock radio. It was Bush and
Tool
and Tool and
Pearl Jam.
And we weren't that. We had our thing, but that wasn't who we were.
I knew labels were really just insane when I in the early 90s when Stone Temple Pilots were put into that grunge thing, and I think I got the second record, Purple or something. Right. It was so melodic, and so I'm like, how could this be that?
Right.
And I just realized after a while, what? Dig what you dig. Ignore what the record companies say.
Like what you like.
Like what you like.
Yeah.
But I had to come to that because we were all kind of like we're rock people. But you buy into their system to a degree, right?
Sure. And I grew up loving soul music. My dad listened to Aretha Franklin and Marvin Gaye and Al Green, and so I always had that in my blood too. But it's the labels are. It's a shame we have to label everything. It's just good music is good music. I don't care if it's got a pedal steel or a saxophone.
The labels are struggling today, trying to pigeonhole. They're still trying to pigeonhole bands, and they're constantly. And again, I think that I have hope. I also have hope that I think kids will continue to play guitar. Many years ago with Guitar Hero, I never thought that would happen. Scott, I thought it was going to kind of go away because kids were getting enjoyment out of actually pretending to play the instrument.
Yeah.
But there seems to be a trend of people picking up the acoustic guitar again.
Yeah, I hope so. Yeah. I mean, there's all those young bands now that are rock bands like Greta Van Fleet and Native Sons.
How do you feel about them?
I don't really have an opinion. People seem to really either love them or hate them.
I like them.
You do like them?
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't.
I wish he didn't sound like Roberts so much.
Yeah.
But the guitar playing is he's a reincarnation of Jimmy Page.
Right. I bet if I went to a concert and saw them live, I'd be like, oh, these guys are fun.
Pretty powerful.
They're young, and I think it's cool that they're just young people playing rock music.
Yeah.
But when you're my age, our age, when you're in your 50s, you already got that firsthand.
You did.
And you got it 40 years ago, and it's like, okay, I'm just not really interested.
The only
now.
reason I think I am is I was such a fan of Zeppelin, and there was such a small catalog of music.
Oh, right.
So this is kind of, in some degree, this is kind of like, this is new Zeppelin to me. If they could still do it, this is it.
Right.
But had it been them emulating a band with a long catalog, I think most people, honestly, if it was like, I don't know, if it was a band that was around forever and they were emulating them, I don't know if they'd be quite as popular. I don't know. I just think the Zeppelin catalog's so small that it's just people are crazy, and it's so different. I mean, to think about it, it's no one sounds like that today.
Right.
With all analog equipment, the analog instruments, they're recreating that vibe that we kind of grew up on.
Right, and that's a cool thing, because if you listen to all the popular songs that my kids listen to, it's all very processed,
electronic.
Yeah,
maybe.
it's even I don't know how if there's even real drummers on on a lot of that
Probably
stuff.
not.
Probably not. But I don't care if a song moves me, it moves me. I don't really mind that it doesn't have maybe a live drummer, but I'm just of an older generation. And it's like I said, and I alluded to this earlier with watching those young people sing songs on TV shows. It's just like, well, yeah, they're good singers, but I've already heard the original, and and they did it better.
Right.
So they're a good singer.
99 times out of 100,
just,
that's always the case.
I'm not interested.
Did you like the Black Crowes?
I did like the Black Crowes. I in
thought
fact,
you would.
Yeah, I like the Black Crowes a lot. I thought their the first album was cool, but the follow up, Southern Harmony and Musical Companion with Remedy, that record is just mind blowing.
I know.
I mean, that's when I really was like, wow, these guys are.
And that's a rock and roll band.
That's a rock and roll band, and I saw them open up when their record came out, before they hit big. They opened up for a band called Junkyard. There was they were kind of a metal-y type band, blues metal type band from LA called Junkyard, and they played a club it was in like Dormont.
Really?
Yeah, dude. We've talked about this with the guys in the band, and somebody in the band would remember the name of the club, but they opened up for Junkyard, the Black Crowes, and we were. I'll never forget our sound man at the time was working that show.
Okay.
And we were going on the road. We were leaving that night for Columbus, and he was like, "Well, I'm doing this show with these bands in Dormont. Just pick me up at the show." So we were like, "Okay, well, we'll just go to the show." Had never heard of the Black Crowes before.
Right.
I'd heard the Junkyard had a song that I actually liked and had heard before, so I was like, well, we'll go see Junkyard, and I saw the Black Crowes, and there's a couple hundred people in the audience, and I was like, these guys are incredible.
So you knew it then.
So I knew right away, and then the album came out, and that was 90, probably.
Yeah, 89 or 90. Yeah.
And then that album came out, and so they were great, and even then. That was the height of like boy bands. I mean, that was Backstreet Boys and
absolutely right.
So to hear a band like the Black Crowes become popular, I was pretty excited to know that.
And they had to have been a record executive's nightmare, because how did you pigeonhole? What were they?
Yeah, they
weren't metal.
No, they weren't metal.
They were like the second coming of the Stones almost.
Right, they were very bluesy. They were fantastic.
Yeah.
It's a shame they couldn't keep it together.
Yeah, but. You guys did.
Not too many bands did.
You guys did.
Well, we're lucky because we never got really successful, so we had to keep it together. So, I mean, it's kind of true. We had to do it so none of us would have to get day jobs. We didn't want to work.
All right.
And so we were like, well, it's the Clarks or selling medical supplies. I don't want to sell medical supplies. So.
Stay with the Clarks, I think. You'd be better
stick
off.
with the Clarks.
Well, so what's the future look like for the Clarks? And for you, solo-wise,
well,
put your little Nostradamus hat on for me.
Yeah, well, it looks good. I mean, the band.
I know. I'll try to get this up before the show, but you would show Saturday evening.
Saturday night,
DVE,
right? The DVE Rocker at Stage
yeah.
AE, which is us and Gathering Field, and a blast from the 90s, as well as the Hawkeyes and Gene the Werewolf, younger guys, and rock bands, and then the Affordable Floors, who we grew up with.
I saw that
in the 80s. And that's so cool that we're doing shows 30-some years later together.
Did you ever play at the Decade? Was that a thing?
Yeah, we played at the Decade for sure. That was big for us. We started out at Graffiti. We opened up for the Romantics. What I Like About You, remember them?
Wow,
we opened up for the Romantics, and
like the vinyl black suits that they were there.
Yeah, they were dicks.
Were they really?
They were kind of dicks.
Yeah, they had the spike hair. They all kind of all looked the same.
I love the song though. The song
all looked the same.
The song was great.
Yeah,
but so we started at Graffiti in North Oakland. And the Affordable Floors were the big Pittsburgh band at the time.
I remember.
88, 89. They were huge. They put an album out called Drumming on the Walls, and they were getting record label attention. And sort of, people would say they had like a bit of a Peter Gabriel vibe. They were used synthesizers and stuff.
They were heavy on electric stuff,
and very popular. They were packing Graffiti, which was, we were envious. So we were opening up for them, and so to have them on this show with us is pretty awesome.
That's pretty cool.
But to answer your question, I think we're going to make another album because we need a promotional tool for people to keep coming to our shows.
How far along the process are you?
Just starting to write songs.
Okay.
Very much at the beginning of the process. The last album came out last summer, and we're not quite on the 2-year plan anymore, so it'll probably come out maybe next year, hopefully, if we get our act together. So, just writing songs and playing shows and just trying to figure out what we're doing and where we're going. It's a little harder these days. I'm a dad and I have young children, and it's you just can't go away for 2 or 3 or 4 weeks. It just doesn't work anymore. So we have to sort of plan our trips. We do long weekends. We a couple weekends ago we did Chicago and Indianapolis and Cincinnati, and played at a festival on Sunday in Cincinnati called the Bunbury Festival. And we had to have been the oldest guys there. I mean, it's just, in one way it was really kind of depressing. But still cool. I mean, people were there, and there was some people that were digging it, but just a lot of young people in crazy outfits. And I think, I was there.
You were there
30 years ago.
I
saw that.
It's a little crazier now.
Yeah, a little different now. In that, now it's I hate to use the Beck term, 2 turntables and a microphone, but it's you get somebody just playing backing tracks, and you get a young girl up there in platform tennis shoes and Dayglow colors, just singing her songs, and that's awesome. I mean, I respect anybody who has that creative bug and wants to get out there and has the skill.
I have a problem with that. That's not a live performance to me.
It's not what
it's partially live.
Yeah, it's partially live. The vocals are live. Yeah, and some there were bands. Obviously, there were bands there too. They're not playing all live instruments.
Right.
But it's not my thing. But they have lots of fans. And
will we ever see the Clarks in 10 years from now putting pre-recorded tracks into the live show?
I doubt it.
Good. Well, I'm glad to hear that.
We actually fooled around with that for a little while in the early 2000s. When we made Another Happy Ending, we had some strings that were on a couple tracks and some rhythm things, and so we got a laptop and.
That's a little different though, because it's hard to recreate strings, right?
It's
live.
It's not the same
but
thing.
Vocals and like an extra rhythm guitar.
Right. We started to go down that road a little bit with rhythm tracks and strings and maybe some instruments that we just couldn't pull off live.
Right.
And that lasted for a few years, but it didn't feel like. For me, it just didn't feel like the band. It just. I think it was a little restrictive for us, but some people are great at it and can really pull it off.
There's some major acts touring the country right now that are exceptionally good at it. That's for darn sure.
Yeah. The guy from Greg from Girl Talk, a Pittsburgh guy, is just he's just a DJ. I mean, I want to say he's just a DJ.
Right.
He's a DJ.
Right.
But he puts his own creativity.
Sure.
On pre-recorded music, and there's a skill and a talent.
And there's a place for that.
And there is, and he's tours all over the country, and there's a lot of people that do that. It's not my thing, but certainly there are people that love it, and I respect anybody who has that creative bug that wants to just get out there and do what they do.
Before we end today, I want to ask you about Corbin and Hanner. Did you have any songwriting work with Dave Corbin?
I never have. I've always known who they were.
Yeah, because Abby, I think one of the two was in his life for a period of time, right around the same time I had met both of you.
I did a show, a songwriter circle at Rosebud back in the 2000s, and Bob Corbin was on. It was me and Bob Corbin and a guy named Jeffrey Gaines from Harrisburg, who's really talented, and somebody else it was Eric Bazillion from the Hooters.
Wow.
It was a great night.
Yeah,
it was a very unusual group of musicians, you know.
Right.
They really didn't know who I was, but I knew who Eric Bazillion was, and obviously I knew who Bob Corbin was, and that's the night I met Jeffrey, and he was totally cool.
Wow.
We all got along really well, and everybody was like, man, that was a great song. So it was really a fun evening, but I knew Bob from that, and then Dave Hanner wrote a song with Greg on Feathers and Bones, a song called Magazine.
How about that?
Yeah, so they're friends, and they've collaborated, and we've known his son Jake Hanner is a really talented musician and producer, and I've worked with Jake on a Bill Deasy project, so I do know Corbin and Hanner.
They have their fingerprints on so much of
how about
Pittsburgh's music. It's
and have written some really big songs.
There's no question. For a lot of other artists that come out of Nashville, especially too, and in pop music for that matter.
Yeah.
Hey, they've done all right.
Yeah, I would say so.
This has been great. I appreciate this.
You're welcome.
It means the world to me.
I really had a good time.
Yeah, and I hope we took it in a different direction than the standard.
Well, it was very in depth. I rarely get to talk that in depth about the career and the songs and the albums. So that was a pleasure for me. Thanks for having me.
Well, I hope you keep playing forever, my friend.
Thanks, buddy.
Thank you so much.
I'm not going to quit anytime soon.
All right. Scott Blasey. Thank you all.
Thanks, guys.